Okay, we are good to go. Zok the Heilige Gemara. I believe we're up to the beginning of the parak. Is that where you're up to? Are you up to the beginning of the parak, or should I go back a little more?
If you want to go back, why not?
Yes, I'm not sure because on Friday, some people left earlier, some people left later. So let's go back to after the Mishnah, because that's really where 10 to 7 was after the Mishnah. So we'll go to the Gemara right after the Mishnah on Daf Mem Dalet Amud Beis. Ma'ika ben Rabbi Yosy le Rabbi Yosy Aglili. The Mishnah had a machlokes as to what does it mean Yorei v'racha levov that gets released from active combat. So Rabbi Kiva said that it was someone who's terribly afraid. Rabbi Yosy said, or first Rabbi Yosy Aglili said, anybody who's afraid of an affair that he might have. And Rabbi Yosy said that he lists off a specific set of affairs: Alman l'kain gadol, Grusha v'chalutza l'kain hedyet, Mamzer the sin Yisrael, which are Allah, the Raisa. So the Gemara wants to know what's the difference between Rabbi Yosy Aglili, who said any avera, and Rabbi Yosy, who listed off a specific set of affairs. Zog the Gemara Ike benayu avera d'Rabbanan. The nafkamina will be if someone was over an avera d'Rabbanan, is he released from the war? According to Rabbi Yosy Aglili, he is. And according to Rabbi Yosy plain, he's not. Zog to Gemara. Himan Oslo. Now that we know this machlokes, who would we attribute the following brisa to? Haditanya. Soch ben tefila l'tefila. Someone spoke out and was mafsik between the tefillah shel yad and the tefillah shel rosh. Averi biyadoi, that's an avera. And v'chayzer aleh me'archei al-mulchama. If one was in a battle, he would actually leave the Muhammad because of it. So this is an avera d'Rabbanan that's exempting him from active combat. Keman Rabbi Yosy Aglili. This would be consistent with Rabbi Yosy Aglili. Now the Gemara wants to know who's the Tana of the next brisa. Man Tana Laha, the Tana Rabbanan. Shomakal Karnois Versia. He heard the horns of the opposing army and he got terrified. Hagavas Teresim, the smashing noises of the shield smashing together, Versia, and he started to tremble. Or Tichtuach Harabas, he saw the shine and the glimmer of the swords. Umayim Shoishisin Loy al Bercha, and he has water running down his thighs. I wonder where that water could be coming from. Chayzer, he also goes back. So that's talking about someone who's truly terrified. Who is the Madamar who said in our Mishnah that someone who's truly terrified leaves the Muhammad? Let's say it's Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Yosy Aglili, because Rabbi Yosy Aglili said terrified means did an avera. Of course, Rabbi Yosy Aglili agrees to someone who's terrified, like Rabbi Kiva said, that they are exempt from active combat. He adds to it additionally someone who did an avera. We don't want him to put panic into the ranks. And therefore, we let him go. Gewaltig. I want to share with you a beautiful word that Chaim Tzvi Lebowitz told me. Yerem Chutin told me a very beautiful word. It's these three things: Banabayis, Eris Isha, and not a Kerem. So Chaim Tzvi told me from the Chassam Sofer that it's all about avoiding panic in the ranks. In the Teichacha, there's three specific things that are mentioned. He'll marry a woman, Vishachish Kavena, he'll be Noitea Kerem, and somebody else will harvest it. He'll build a house, and somebody else will live in it. So the fear is, some Sofer, if someone's standing and he sees the guy behind the guy beside him got killed, and he knows that the guy beside him just built a house, or was just Ma'aris and Isha, or just planted a kerem, he's going to think to himself, oh my, this is the Teichacha happening. We're going to get obliterated. We see already the signs of Teichacha, and they're going to completely panic. That's why it's B'davka, these three things that release people from going to the war, because these are things that would make people think, if they were killed, that the Teichacha is happening now. Zok the Heilige Gemara weiter. So the Mishnah said, all the way at the top of our daf, the Mishnah says, why do we allow the officers to break the shins of somebody who wants to leave the war, desert the army? Is because Shetchilas Nisa Nefila. The first step of retreat is total collapse. Now that doesn't make sense. So the Gemara asks right away, Hi, Mipnei Shetchilas Nisa Nefila. That's not true. It's the opposite. It's Mipnei Shetchilas Nefila Nisa Miboyle. The first step of total collapse is retreating. Dr. Gemara, you're right. We have to amend the Mishnah. Now, for the next nickel, we need to look at the Mishnah again to understand the comments on the Mishnah. So the Gemara said, the Mishnah said, fourth line from the top, where do we say that there's exemptions to the war? That's a Mochemes Harishos. Mochemes Mitzvah, if it's a Mochemes of Mitzvah, nobody's exempt. Everybody, even a Chosan and Kala, has to fight. Rabbi Yehuda says, even by a Mochemes Mitzvah, there's exemptions. But if it's a Mochemes Chayva, which is a higher level, now the Gemara is going to tell us shortly that they're not arguing at all about which type of wars have exemptions and which type don't. They're merely arguing in how to label those wars. So the Gemara is going to tell us now. Zok the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Rishus the Rabbanon, the Mechemes Rishus, or the Melchama that the Rabbanon referred to as Melchamas Rishus, Zuhi Mitzvah Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is referring to the same type of Melchama, but he labels a mitzvah. But it's really one and the same. So they're only arguing in how to label the war. There's no argument halacha l'maisa, but there will come out one slight halacha l'maisa difference because of the way they phrased things. And mitzvah the Rabbanon, the Mechemes mitzvah that the Rabbanon refer to, Zui Chayva de Rabbi Yehuda. That's the Mechemes Chayva that Rabbi Yehuda said, and they both agree that everybody has to join the war efforts. Amar Rava. So let's now clarify precisely what type of a Melchama everyone has to fight, which is the type that Rabbi Yehuda calls it Chayva, the Tanna Kamma calls it Mitzvah, and what type of war are there exemptions, which are either called Rishus or Mitzvah. Melchemes Yeshua L'Chavesh, when Yeshua came to conquer Eretz Yisrael, and he was mandated to rout out all the Goyim, that was a true Melchemes Mitzvah. Divrei Hakol Chayva. Everyone knows that's Chayva, meaning everybody has to fight that war. But Melchemes Beis David l'Revacha, the Melchemes that Beis David did, just because Klal Yisrael needed more room, they needed more territory. Divrei Hakol Rishos. Everybody agrees that that's a Melchama where the exemptions do apply. Where is the Machlekes? Keep ligi lemute oivdei kechavim d'layleisi alai. If they were fighting a preemptive war, if the Goyim were building up their fortifications and building up their army, and Klal Yisrael decided, just like by the 6-day war, that we want to do a preemptive strike, that's the Shaila. Now, it's clearly a Melchama where there's exemptions. So the Machlekes is not lagabe whether or not the exemptions apply. Everybody holds the exemptions apply. The Machlekes is lagabe something else. Mari Karla Mitzvah. One calls this Melchemes Mitzvah, Mar Karla Rishos. Nafkamina. Imagine you're a soldier in one of these wars, you're a sniper, you're getting ready, taking aim of your shot. And all of a sudden there's a nutnik tapping you on your shoulder. And you turn around and you say, can I help you? He says, ja, ich bin Ayid von Yerushalayim, ich gehe noch Geld, darf machen Kassene. You can tell him, can't you see I'm in the middle of a Melchemes Mitzvah? Don't bother me. I'm oizit b'mitzvah, potem in a mitzvah. So Mar Karla Mitzvah, Mar Karla Rishos, Nafkamina, la'oizit b'mitzvah, shapotem in a mitzvah. If the war where they're trying to do a preemptive strike, if it's considered a mitzvah, then in such a war you wouldn't have to do any other mitzvahs because you're oishik b'mitzvah. But if it's not called a mitzvah, it's just rishus, then if a meshulach comes to you and that wants you to give him money, then you still have to do the mitzvah. Baruch Hashem, we were zoicha to finish the 8th parak of Masechah Sotah, the parak of Meshuach Mochama, and B'li Neder, Hadin Alach Meshuach Mochama, Hadin Alach Meshuach Mochama, Hadin Alach Meshuach Mochama. Zok the Heilige Naya Mishnah of the new parak. Egla Rufa. We learned a couple of prakim ago. Elu Ne'emarin. These are things that are said b'chol lashon, and these are things that are said b'lashon hakodesh. One of the things that have to be said specifically in lashon hakodesh is Egla Rufa. Egla Rufa lashon hakodesh. Shenemar, it says in the pasuk, Ki yimatzei chalol ba'adama v'yatzu zechenecha v'shavtecha. Where in the world do you see from this pasuk anything about lashon hakodesh? The Gemara is going to ask that kasha. The Gemara is going to say that after it says Egla Rufa b'lashon hakodesh, we need to stick in the psukim where we learn it from, because this next chelak where the Mishnah quotes the yimatzei chalol, that's not at all the makar that Egla Rufa has to be b'lashon hakodesh. What happens? Shloisha mi bezdin hagadol shebirushalayim hoyu yotzim. They took 3 dayanim, not from any bezdin. It had to be from the great Sanhedrin of 71 that sat in the Lishkas Hagazos. How many of them have to go out to do this measuring? 3. But Rabbi Yehuda Omer Chamisha. Rabbi Yehuda says it's actually 5. Shenemar, it says Zekenecha, which is plural, which would be 2. V'shavtecha is plural, which is another 2. Ve'ein bezdin shakel. Whenever you need a bezdin, it always has to be an odd number. So Moisifin alei modecha. Now this Mishnah is illustrating this shita of Rabbi Yehuda, who says 5. We have a Tana who says 3. We're going to have to see in the Gemara the reasoning behind the Manam who says 3. What happens if Nimsa Tamun Begal? The mess wasn't found on the floor, he was buried under debris. Or he was hanging off a tree. Or floating on the water. The parsha of Egla Rufa did not apply to these types of mason. Shenemar, because the pasuk says Ba'adama, to exclude V'loi Tamun Begal. It says Noifel V'loi Tali Be'ilan. It says Besada V'loi Tzaf Al Pnei Hamayim. What happens if it's Nimsa Samich L'Saper? You found the dead man right near the border. Or if it was near a city where most of the city are goyim. Or if the city didn't have a bezin, loy hayu moididin. The Bach changed it from orphan to moididin. Moididin means they didn't measure from that city. Rather, they found the 2 closest cities that did qualify. And then the Mishnah seems to be repetitive, and the Mishnah says, "Ein moididin ela le'ir sheyesh ba bezin." You only measure from cities that have a bezin in them. Cities that don't have a bezin, they're not in the parsha of Egla Rufa. Okay, the Mishnah quoted the pasuk and showed us all the lemudim. So let's just look at the pasuk inside, so we could refresh ourselves. It says ki yimatzei chalal ba'adam. You found a chalal. The Gemara is going to say that teaches you chalal. It has to be a murder victim with a sharp knife, like a stab victim. Ba'adama. It has to be on the ground. And our mission just learned from Ba'adama to tell you that not if it's Tamun Bagal. We're going to learn out of the pasuk L'Rishta that it's only from cities that Hashem gives you to distribute amongst Klal Yisrael, which will exclude Yerushalayim, because Yerushalayim was never distributed to Klal Yisrael. It always remained public, that everybody in Klal Yisrael had a chelik in it. Noifel, Rashi, the Mishnah just told us Noifel v'lo toli on the Ilan, Vasada, but not floating on the water. So these are the limudim that we just learned in our Mishnah. We don't know who killed this man. We just dashed in this pasuk. Zechenecha is 2, Shavtecha is 2, and since it's ein bezdin shakel, you add 1. Umadadu, which is a lashon rabim. Madadu means 2 people. They will measure. It's plural. The Gemara is going to ask, so why doesn't this add 2 more? Ela arim asher seviva yisachtalal. And also the Yotzu. The Yotzu and the Madadu, the Gemara is going to ask, the Yotzu should add 2 dayanim, and the Madadu should add 2 dayanim to the mix. We'll get to there in the Gemara. Zok ahead of the Gemara. Maika Amar. Exactly how do you see from the pasuk of Ki Yimatzei Chalal Ba'adama that Egla Rufa has to be done in Lashon HaKodesh? Amar Rabavo Hachika Amar. This is what we need to add into the Mishnah. How do you know that Egla Rufa is Lashon HaKodesh? Shenemar, it says in the parsha of Egla Rufa, Va'anu L'Amru, U'La'alanu Eimer, by the parsha of Hagrizim and Harevil, by the Brachos and Klolos, is it Va'anu L'Avim V'Amru. Ma'ani Amur L'Halal B'Lashon HaKodesh, Avkan B'Lashon HaKodesh. Now, let's see if we could remember. The parsha of Hagrizim and Harevil was in Lashon HaKodesh. How did we know that? So we actually had two pshat and we had a machlokes. One pshat was, it says, Anu B'Koil Ram, and we learned Koil from Matan Torah, which was in Lashon HaKodesh. The other Makar is, we learned V'Anu Anulvim from V'Anu by Chalitza. And by Chalitza says Kacha, so we know it has to be Dafka Lashon HaKodesh. So we learned from Chalitza to the Klolos and Brachas and our Grizim and our Evil that it was also in Lashon HaKodesh. Zok to Gemara, V'Seder Egla Rufa Ketzat, and then the Mishnah continues. What is the order of the Egla Rufa? And then it goes to the next pasuk that the Mishnah quotes. And the Mishnah says, Shloishim mibez nagadol should be Yerushalayim hoyoyt. The Yudamir was Chamisha. Tanu Rabban. Now we're going to get into the nitty gritty of the machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and the Tanakama. Tanu Rabban. Yotu zekenecha v'shavtecha. The zekenecha is 2, Shnayim, v'shavtecha is 9. Vein bez nishakol masivna leim echad. Hareka Chamisha divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Just like our Mishnah says, this is the reasoning behind Rabbi Yehuda's halach. Rabbi Shimon Aimer, so now we just learned who the Tanakama is. Tanakama who says 3 is Rabbi Shimon. He says zekenecha shnayim. The ein bezdin shak. You can't have 2. Therefore, my sifin alay merechad harekan shloshim. Frag the Gemara, does it not say shayftecha in the pasuk? If Rabbi Yehuda used shayftecha to tell you another 2, what is Rabbi Shimon going to do with shayftecha? Rabbi Shimon nami yaksiv b'shayftecha. So the Gemara ahuli boile lemiyuchad shayftecha. The dayanim that come out can't just be any dayanim. They have to be specific dayanim that sat on the bezdin of 71 in the Lishkas Agozos. How do I know that? Because it says shayftecha. So therefore, I don't have an extra shayftecha to add another 2 dayanim, because shayftecha is telling me that the dayan has to be from the Lishkas Agozos. Correct the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda also needs to know that. Where does he know it from? He can't use shayftecha because shayftecha is telling you that there's another 2 dayanim here. So how does he know that it has to be the dayanim of the Lishkas Agozos? The Gemara Rabbi Yehuda miziknei ziknecha. It could have said ziknei. Why does the pasuk say ziknecha? To tell you that it has to be dayanim from the bezdin hagadol. Correct Gemara Rabbi Shimon. So if that's the case, Rabbi Shimon also could learn it from ziknecha. Why does it need shayftecha to teach to you? So Rabbi Shimon, because he calls it Rachman is ziknei, if it only said plain ziknei, havaminafilu ziknei ashuk, I would have thought any older person, even if he's not a dayan. Because Rachman is ziknecha, ziknecha teaches you that it has to be a dayan, but not necessarily a dayan who works in the bezdin hagadol by the Lishkas Agozos. Because Rachman is ziknecha, havamina afilu sanhedrik tana, a dayan from any bezdin can be part of the Egla Rufa team. So if that's the case, Rabbi Yehuda has no longer has an available shayftecha to add another 2 dayanim, because he also needs shayftecha to tell me that it has to be a dayan from the best nagadol. Dr. Gemara, no. Rabbi Yehuda, how does he know it needs to be from the best nagadol? Gomar ziknei from the ziknei ha'eda by the par helam davar shel tzibur. The halach is if bezdin paskins, bezdin nagadol paskins about a certain chayv krisos that it's mutter, and Klal Yisrael is over b'shoigin and the chayv krisos, they bring a communal carbon called the par helam davar shel tzibur. By that par helam davar shel tzibur, 5 dayanim from the Lishkas Agozos have to come and do smicha on this par and say vidui. So we learn from there that it has to be dayanim from the Lishkas Agozos. So therefore, I know from this Gzera Shava that they have to be dayanim from the Lishkas Agozos. So I still have shayftecha extra to teach me there's 2 more dayanim involved. Correct the Gemara, I don't understand. If you're going to have a Gzera Shava from Parel and Davar Shel Tzibur to tell you what type of dayanim they need to be, dayanim from the Lishkas Agozos, why don't you also learn from Parel and Davar Shel Tzibur that you need 5 dayanim? You could learn everything from there, that it's 5 dayanim. Why do I need Zechanecha b'Shevtecha Lamali? Why is Rabbi Yehuda darshning Zechanecha Shevtecha once he's subscribed into this Xeris Shashava from Haram Davar Shal Tzibur? We know everything we need to know. Ella must be that Rabbi Yehuda does not subscribe to the Xeris Shava. So if he doesn't subscribe to the Xeris Shava, how does Rabbi Yehuda know that it has to be Dayan Mumchin? Ella Vav V'Shavtecha, and we should really look at the Bach who cleans up the Lashon. Ella Zok to Gemara. Ella V'Shavtecha Rab Shimon. He learns V'Shavtecha like Rab Shimon that Shavtecha is telling you that you need Dayan Mumchin. So how does he know you need two Dayanim? Vav L'Minyana. It could have just said Shavtecha. It says V'Shavtecha to tell you that you need two. Not only does it have to be Dayan Mumchin, you need two. So you have Shavtecha two, Zechanecha two, and Ein Vezn Shakel, so you add one, total of 5. Rab Shimon, what about Rab Shimon? So now let's turn over onto today's daf. He holds you don't learn anything from the extra vav. And therefore, you have 2 dayadim from Zechanecha, Ein Vezn Shakel, you add a 3. Correct the Gemara, if you're going to start darshaning from any plural expression in the pasuk that it adds 2 dayanim, Elamayata ve'yetzu is plural, so that should add shnayim. Umadadu is plural, it should add shnayim. So if you're adding 4 to the total, Rabbi Yehuda is at 5, 5 plus 4 is 9. Rabbi Shimon is at 3, 3 plus 4 is 7. Rabbi Yehuda arekan tisha, Rabbi Shimon arekan shiva. Zok to Gemara, no, they don't learn Umadadu and ve'yatu to teach you about extra dayanim, because they use Umadadu V'Yatu to teach you another important halacha by Egla Rufa. The Bezin themselves have to go out. They cannot send a shliach Bezin. The Dayan himself has to get down and dirty and do this measurements. Umadadu, they have to measure no matter what. Even if it's obvious which city is closest, you don't even need to measure, it's obvious. Nevertheless, I feel nimsa ba'alila ear. You know why? The Eglaruva process, that's mechaper, requires a measurement. The measurement isn't because you need to know which one is closer. It's because the Torah says you need a measurement. And therefore, you do it no matter what. Okay, so now we have a machlokes in our Mishnah. Everybody agrees the only people that need to go out are members of the Sanhedrin. The shaila gist is how many? 5 or 3? Zok Gemara, this Mishnah disagrees with Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov, because Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov says that besides the Sanhedrin, there's 2 other people who have to attend this process. And tell you Rebbe Eliezer ben Yaakov, Eimer Zechanecha zu Sanhedrin, that's referring to the Sanhedrin. Shavtecha zemelech v'kohen gadol. Who else has to come? The king and the kohen gadol. How do you get from the word Shavtecha, king? Melech l'chsev melech b'mishpat yamid aretz. And how do you see from Shavtecha kohen gadol? Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov just said Sanhedrin. What does Sanhedrin mean? Does that mean all of the Sanhedrin? And then he's arguing both on Rabbi Shimon and on Rabbi Yehuda? Or maybe when he said Sanhedrin, he means either 3, like Rabbi Shimon, or 5, like Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, B'melech v'kohen gadol, who the Polik, is he only arguing on the Mishnah because he adds the Melech and Kohen gadol? But as far as how many members of the Sanhedrin he's agreeable to someone in our Mishnah, Ikra Rabbi Yehuda, that's 5. Ikra Rabbi Shimon, that's 3. Svirle. Oidilma b'Sanhedrin nami Polig the Ika Kula Sanhedrin. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is even arguing in our Mishnah, and he holds that the entire Sanhedrin, all 71 Dayanim, have to come out with the 2, the king and the Kohen gadol, for a total of 73 people. Amar Be'ezhev Tashma. Rabbi Yosy says, I'm going to bring you a raya from a brisa. Now we know there's a halacha of a zaken mamre. A zaken mamre who rebels against the bezin agoda. Any lower level bezin won't lead to a zaken mamre. It's only if he's disputing and not listening to the bezin agoda. But we're going to learn today that the bezin agoda has to issue their psak while they're seated in their lishkas agazos, not if they're on a field trip. So the Brisa says, Matzon Zakan Mamri Abe Pagi. The Zakan Mamri met the Bezdin on the outskirts of the city, and they passed for him, the Himra Aleim, and he rebelled. Oh, you might think this is called a Zakan Mamre, and he gets killed. It only happens if they're in the Makaim of the Bezdin, the Lishka Sagos. So that's the story. So now the Gemara says, Bezdin, the Lishka Sagos, was out of the Lishka Sagos. So let's first the Nafakam. How many Dayanim is this Brisa referring to that this Zakat Mamre met these Dayanim at the outskirts of the city? How many of them were there? If there's only some of the Bezdin that they met, but the rest of the Bezdin is still in home base, why is he a Zakat Mamre even if he rebels? We don't know the opinion of the other Dayanim who are still at the Lishkas Agazis. They might agree with him. So therefore he might be right. So in order that we should have a case where he's a Zakan Mamre for sure, and the only reason why he's not punished is because it wasn't in the Lishkas Agazis, is Al Pshita de Nafakul. It must be that he met all 71 Dayanim out of the city. Question is, what in the world were these 71 Dayanim doing on a field trip? Why aren't they where they belong, at their posts in the Lishkas Agazis? For what reason did the Bezdin leave the Lishkas Agazis? If they were just going on the employee appreciation day trip or an inspirational trip to teach you about teamwork, would they be able to leave the Lishkas Agazis for something like that? But it says in the pasuk, your masters, referring to the Bezdin Agadol, Agan Asayar, they are the ones who sit in a semicircle. The Bezdin Agadol sat in a semicircle because when they're discussing a topic, it's much easier for you to give over your opinion and your perspective when you're looking somebody in the eye, and then when he argues with you or disagrees with you, and he looks you in the eye, it's so much easier to have a conversation and to transmit what you want to say and understand what someone is saying to you if you're facing them. That's why the Bezdin was in the semicircle. But al yechzer amezek, you shouldn't be missing the amount of how much you would use to dilute wine. Normally, when you dilute wine, it's 2 parts water to 1 part wine, which means that there has to be at least 1/3 of the Bezdin at the Lishkas Agazis. Why is that? If someone has a need, a dayan has a need, he needs to take a leave of absence. He has a doctor's appointment, he has a personal matter. When can he leave? If there's at least 23 dayanim on duty, Yoyte is allowed to leave. So these Sanhedrin in this story that we're talking about, where the Zakan Mamre met them outside the city, they had to have had a reason to all be out. The only reason why they could have been out, so what mitzvah can there possibly be that would require the whole Bezdin to leave? Lamai. Lav Lamadinas Egla, it must be that they were going to measure the Egla Rufa. And this proved that the whole Bezdin needs to go, not just 3 dayanim or 5 dayanim. Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. So this would be proof to Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov on the tzad that we're saying that Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov holds that the entire Sanhedrin needs to be involved. Amar Abai Loi. Abai said you don't have a raya. There's another reason why all of Bezdin would be required. Not necessarily are they required for Egla Rufa, but if they want to expand the city limits of Yerushalayim, or if they want to expand the perimeter of the Azara, for that you need a full Bezdin. You know why? Because when they're expanding the city limits of Yerushalayim, what that does is it makes it that now you can eat Kodesh Kalim in a larger area. So they have to be Mekadesh, that extra territory that they're adding to the city, to make it eligible to be able to eat Kodesh Kalim there, like a carbon shlomim. Expanding the Azara means you're allowing Kodesh Kodeshim to be eaten in a greater area. Again, they have to place a Kedusha on it. That requires 71 dayanim. But you don't have a raya that for Egla Rufa you need 71. Rabbi Yosef argued that the reason why the Bezdin left was because of Egla Rufa. And therefore you have a raya like Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, that for Egla Rufa, the entire Bezdin has to come out. And we have a brisa to support that, because the brisa is relating the same story as before, but it's giving more detail. Motana beis pagi vehimra alein kegoyin sheyatzu lemedidas egla. Why did Bezdin leave? Why are they out of the city? Because they went to measure the Egla Rufa. So you see black and white that you need the whole Bezdin. Beautiful. You found the mace buried under debris. Or hang it off a tree. Zog to Gemara, our Mishnah says that Tamun is exempt from Egla Rufa. Why? It says Ba'adama v'loy Tamun. So the question is, can you be medayik from Ba'adama that it means to exclude Tamun? I'll show you there's actually a machlokes tanoim about it. It seems like our Mishnah holds like Rabbi Yehuda and not like the Rabbanon. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa. And this is about shikha. Shikha is a person is cutting the wheat in his field, and he cuts it and it falls down. When people, and what happens is he's going to gather all the wheat that he cut, but he forgets a couple of pieces. Allah is if he forgets a couple of pieces, he's not allowed to go back to get it. So the Gemara wants to know, the Brisa wants to know, what if he forgot some pieces, but they were covered over? Something covered them over. Shmata, something covered them over. So it says, V'shachachta omer basodeh, karat l'tomen, that excludes the Talmud Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Now that's very parallel to our Mishnah, where we said, Ba'adama prat l'tomen. Basodeh prat l'tomen. That's Rabbi Yehuda. So our Mishnah is consistent with Rabbi Yehuda. But v'chachamim oimrim, basodeh l'rabbi says a tomen. Basodeh says that even if the wheat that you forgot was covered over, it's still considered shikha. So by the same token, he should say, Ba'adama l'rabbi says a tomen, and therefore even a mace that's covered by debris should also have the process of Egla Rufa. Amarav, no, afilu tem Rabbanan. Even though the Rabbanan by shikha learns that Besada l'rabbi says a tomen, over here the Rabbanan would agree that the Adama is to exclude Tamun. How do you get that? Dr. Murray, because when you analyze Tzukim, you always have to look at the context. Hacha men yani dekra and Haza men yani dekra. Hacha men yani dekra. Let's look at Egla Rufa. The Ksiv, the pasuk says, Ki yimatzei chala. You found a dead man, a murdered victim. It's a very open-ended. It's very inclusive. No matter who he is, no matter how he is, he's murdered. He has the parsha of Egla Rufa. Wherever you found it. Then the pasuk goes right and says Ba'adama. Clearly, Adama is trying to limit the broad klal that we got from the Yimatzei Chala. So therefore, Ba'adama would tell you Prat l'Tama. But when you look at the pasuk of Shikha, you're starting off with a very narrow scope. So therefore, Basada is going to open up that scope. You forgot an oimer. Dr. Gemara, shikha dumi de ktsir. We have ktsir and then we have shikha right together. So we're comparing the stock of wheat that he forgot about to the stock of wheat that he cut. Maktsir bagoli, just like when you're cutting a stock of wheat, it's uncovered, it's there, you could see it. So too the shikha that the Torah mandates you leave to the honey is dafka bagoli, the dafka is uncovered. So the default of the pasuk already excludes Tamun. Then the pasuk adds to it basada. Clearly, that's to open it up. Cause of Rachman basada l'rabbi says. So there's their machlokes. Correct the Gemara. Rabbi Yehuda nami tepeklei mi shikha domidiksir. We learned how does Rabbi Yehuda know that there's no chiv shikha by Tamun, because he dashes the pasuk basada l'mu'ute Tamun prat Tamun. But we don't need to listen to the Prat Tamun, because the Gemara just told us that if you look at the basic pasuk, he sikser tzircha basada v'shachachta aimer, that Minei Ubei tells you that Tamun would not be mechuyev in shikha. So why did Rabbi Yehuda need to bring the pasuk of Sada? Zok Gemara eina chanami. You're right. He doesn't need the word basada. He knows that Tamun is pater from shikha because it says ki siksar tzircha b'sadacha v'shachachta oimer. So ve'ela b'sada lamali. So now we have an extra word b'sada by the parsha of shikha. What is it going to teach us? So tomorrow be boile the rabbi shikha's kama. The pasuk only talks about shikha when it's already cut down. You forgot some stalks. What if you forget to cut something down and it's remained standing? Zokt b'sadcha, even if it's still part of your soda, it's still connected. It's not cut down, but if you forgot about it, you still have to leave it to the ani. But the problem is the Rabbanon don't have an extra b'sadcha because they use b'sadcha to tell you that Taman is chayiv. So what are they? How are the Rabbanon going to know that shikha's kama? Rabbanon shikha's kama minalu. How do they know that there's a mitzvah of shikha, even if you left it standing, you didn't cut it? Nafkalu michi siksar kitzircha b'sadcha v'shachachta. What did you forget? You forgot b'sadcha, meaning you forgot something that's still connected to your field. Rabbi Yehuda, what's Rabbi Yehuda going to do with that limud? What do you learn from Besatcha? That if a wind came and blew some of your stalks over into your friend's field and you forgot them there, there's no din shikha on that. The shikha is only when it's in your field. How the Rabbanan going to know this limud that if your stalks blow into your friend's field, that there's no din shikha on them? Rabbanan is misadeh besatcha. It could have said basadeh. Why does it say besatcha? To teach you that dafka in your field is there a din shikha, not if it blows over into your friend's field. Rabbi Yehuda, besadeh besatcha and mashmalei. He doesn't learn anything out of besadeh besatcha. So let's stop a second, because whenever you have a back and forth, what does he do with this pasuk and how does he know that? We always end up getting a beautiful limud of extra halachas. So what did we learn today? We learned that there's a machlokes if a covered over stalks have a halacha of shikha. We learned that even if the wheat is still connected to the ground, shikha still applies. And we also learned that if your wheat blows over into your friend's property, there's no din shikha for that. So those are the three extra halachas we were zoicha to learn today. Okay, so we had Rebbe Lozer said that if your produce gets blown over to your friend's field and said safu means they're floating in the airspace of your friend's field. It doesn't say prat if they're on the ground. It says prat lecheshet safu. Maybe they fell on a table, maybe they fell on a rock. That's significant, and we'll get to there in a minute. Boyer B'Yirmiyah. What about Safar Aimosach Shadei? What if the wind blew and kicked up some of your stalks, and some of them landed on the rock, some of them landed on a table, so it's not sitting on the ground? Would those have a din of shikha or not? Mao. Aver sadik sadadami. If it's in the airspace of your field, it's just as if it's on the ground, and there would be a din shikha for it. Or lavka sadadami. Or no, it's not in your field, and therefore you would not be mechuyev in shikha. Omar leirav kanler papi. Varmi leirav kanler b'zvid. Tivshud leibidi rabavo. Let's analyze what we just said over from Rabavo Amar B'Lazar. What did he say? He said, "Prat shetzafu oimrim l'sechsad chaverim." When are you potter? When you have suspended produce, that's if it's suspended in your friend's field. The chaveira in l'toich shadei eloi. Suspended tfua is exempt from shikha if it's in your friend's field, not if it's in your own field. So we have a raya that in your own field, even if it's suspended, you'll be chayiv in shikha. Frank the Gemara, that cannot be a good deal. Because are you going to tell me that Rabavo Amar B'Lazar holds that it's only potter from shikha if it's in your friend's field on the table? What if it lands on the ground in your friend's field? Surely you would also be potter from shikha. Even if it's on the ground in your friend's field, it's not besatcha, it's besadoy. So you can't be medayik that davka if it's suspended in your friend's field and not if it's suspended in your field, because the brisa that's talking about Rabbi Vo is talking about suspended in your friend's field doesn't mean suspended; it means even on the ground. Ella l'soich sadech haverim filu monachet, and therefore you could make a deal that if it's on the floor in your friend's field, it's been potter. If it's on the floor in your field, it's going to be chai. But we don't have a raya. What will be the halacha if it was suspended in your field? If it means even on the floor, so why did Rabbi Vo and Merlozer say tzafu? It was suspended. Even if it's on the floor, it's going to be potter. How did it get onto the floor of your friend's field? Because it blew over and it was suspended over his field until it landed. So that's all Rabbi Vo meant to say. So once again, we have a shiloh. What if the stalks of wheat, you have stalks in your field that you forgot, but they're not on the ground. They're on the table, they're on the rock. Are they subject to the rule of shikha? Tashma, we learned. You did not forget these stalks. You actually picked them up because you were going to take them to the city. And something happened, you had to pause for a minute. So you put them down, you put some stalks down on other stalks that were on the floor there. And you forgot them. So now you have stalks on the bottom that you forgot, and they're covered over by stalks on top that you left there that you forgot as well. So the rule of shikha apply to any of these stalks, the upper stalks that you put down and the lower stalks that you forgot that were covered by the upper stalks. So the halacha is hatachdoin shikha, the bottom layer is shikha, so there's no problem with taman. But the upper is not shikha, assuming because it's suspended. So you have a raya that if it's suspended and it's not on the ground in your property, you'll be part of him shikha. But Reb Shimon and Yehuda, I remember Reb Shimon, shneim einam shikha. Neither of them are shikha. Atachta mipnei shehu taman, ve'ayam mipnei shehu tzaf. So let's think about this. Akan loy pligi. There is a machlokes about whether or not there's shikha on the elyon. That's the machlokes over here. Atachton shikha, ve'oyin any shikha. So everybody agrees that the elyon is not shikha. The machlokes is only if the tachton is shikha. So zok to Gemara, akan loy pligi ela b'tachton. There's only a machlokes if the lower layer of stalks, whether or not because of tamun, because they're tamun, they're covered over, whether or not there's a chi of shikha for them. I will be elyon, but the stalks that you put down, that you place down on top of these stalks, divrei hakoil lo have a shikha. Everybody else is not shikha. So you have a raya that saf in your own chater, on your own produce, is not going to be subject to shikha. Dr. Mo, you don't have a raya. Because maybe the reason why in this brisa everybody agrees that the stalks that you put on top are part of him shikha, maybe it has nothing to do with the fact that they're tough. Maybe there's a completely different reason why they're part of him shikha. Shani Hazam came the Achzik Bey Zachabe. Let's not forget, he picked them up. He was going to take them with him. Maybe once you pick them up and take them with you, they're no longer shikha, even if you put them down later. Eventually, he's going to take them home. He's going to put them down. Every time he puts them down, he forgets them. That means it's shikha. No. If originally you don't pick them up, then they're shikha. Here he first picked them up. Therefore, they're not shikha. But you don't have a raya that if the wind blew up some stalks and made them land on the table, there we don't know if it would be potter or not. Frankly, Gemara, if you're telling me the whole reason why it was potter from shikha here is because I already picked it up, and that has nothing to do with the fact that it's lying on top of other grain, the case should have been where I picked up some stock and they put them down on the floor. Why did the Bryce have to discuss a case where I put them on top of other stocks? Of course it could have. You know why? The Bryce is talking about that the owner put these stocks on top of other stocks is because he wanted to teach you the other halacha about Talmud. Mishum Tachton. He wanted to teach you the halacha of Talmud. And there's a machlokes, in fact. if the fact that these stalks covered over the stalks on the bottom, if it makes the stalks on the bottom potter from shikha. Frankly, more you cannot say that because the Brisa gives us a reason why the upper stalks are potter, mipnei shu tzaf, because they're suspended. So you see the reason is not because he picked them up already. The reason is because they're suspended. Well, mipnei shu tzaf gomer. So tomorrow, that's not what it means. Aim of mipnei shu kitzaf. You know why it's potter? Is because in order for these stalks to get here, they had to have been picked up in his hand. So when they were picked up in his hand, they were suspended. But it's not the suspended, the fact that they're suspended in midair, that makes it potter. It's because they were suspended in his hand. And that means he already was coining them, and therefore they're no longer subject to the rules of shikha. Amar Abaye. Abaye was in a really good mood one day. He was feeling sharp and chipper. And he said, we all know that Ben Azai was super sharp and super deep. And he was the top Talmud Chacham in Tveria. And he would stand up and anybody could throw any question at him from any sugya. And he would be able to answer it sharp, witty, to the point. Abai was feeling really good one day in the shuk of Pumbedisa. And he said, you can ask me any question that you want today. And I'll answer you because I'm feeling really hot today. Amar Abai, Hareini ki ben Azai b'shuk Tveria. So they challenged him. Okay, well, we have a good question for you. What if there are two dead bodies, one on top of the other? From which corpse does he measure? And it's speaking where they weren't directly on top of each other, because then they're in the same place. It means they were somewhat offset from each other. So there's four ways to look at it. Either min b'min habitatum, even though it's one body on top of another body, the bottom body is considered tamun, and we know that a body that's tamun does not have the din egla rufa. It says ba'adama v'loy tamun, and umin b'minoi levatzach. Min b'minoi is not considered suspended, so the upper body is not considered suspended. It's considered basada on the ground, and therefore he also has the rules of egla rufa, and therefore. I'm sorry, the bottom one would be Taman. If the bottom one is Taman, then there is no Chiyav of Egla Rufa on the bottom one, but there would be a Chiyav on the top one. And therefore, Me'el Yud Moedeit. Which body are you measuring from? The upper body. Oidom maybe the opposite. Min b'minoi have it soft. Maybe if it's min b'minoi, the upper one is considered suspended, and therefore there's no din Egla Rufa on the upper body. But min b'minoi lo have a Taman. But maybe it's not considered Taman if it's covered with another body. And therefore, the lower one is the body that we're going to use. Maybe it's both. Maybe min b'minoi have a taman, and therefore you cannot measure from the bottom one. And min b'minoi have a tzaf, and you can't measure from the top one either. And Rashi throws in the fourth option. Maybe min b'minoi is not tzaf, and you can measure from the top, and min b'minoi is not taman, and you can measure from the bottom, and you measure both. So that is the shayla. Omer Lei, Abai said, that's your shayla, no problem, I have an answer to you. Tanitua, we learned it in a brisa. Let's turn over to Amud to Daf Memhe Amud Beis. Tanitua, Omer Shehechsem Boile Lichei Leir, the brisa we just brought down, a person picked up some of his grain, and he did not forget it. And he was planning to take it into the city with him. And then he got distracted. And then he put it down on another stalk of wheat. And then he forgot it. So now there's two stalks that were forgotten, the upper and the lower. So what did we say? The bottom one is considered shikha because it's not called Talmud, or maybe because Talmud is not an issue. But Elo and shikha. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda Omer, Mishum Rabbi Shimon, Shneim Einon Shikha. Neither of them are Shikha. Hatachlim Ibnei Shu Taman ve'Elyum Ibnei Shu Tzah. So let's think about this. There's a machlokas over here about the bottom stalk of wheat, if it's potter from Shikha because it's Taman, or if it's not potter from Shikha because it's not Taman. So let's make an assumption. So if Ruah Dahani Tanoi Prabhudasphere, let's assume that everybody agrees that if it's tamun by shikha, you're potter. The Amar V'Sada Prat Tamun. So a stalk of wheat that's covered over is not subject to the rules of shikha. So what's the machlokes here, whether or not in this case the lower stalks are subject to shikha or not? My love, the Mars over min b'mina have a tamun. One man of the world's min b'mina have a tamun. So even though the lower wheat is covered with the upper wheat, it's called tamun, and therefore it's part of shikha. Mars over lo have a tamun. So this would be a good raya to our shaila. Our shaila was if one body on top of another body, does the top body make the bottom body tamun or not? Well, we have the same shaila over here by shikha. Does the top wheat make the bottom wheat tamun or not? Zok Gemara, you don't have a raya. Loi, Ikar Yehuda Svirlu. Let's say we hold like Rabbi Yehuda. The chula alma min b'mina have a tamun. Maybe everybody would agree that min b'mina is tamun. So what's the machlokes by shikha that we just quoted? Maybe that's good for the machlokes, whether or not there is an exemption of tamun for shikha. The Rabbanon k'Rabbanon. The Rabbanon know that the Rabbanon that there's no exemption. Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda, Rabbi Yehuda, there is an exemption. Correct the Gemara, if the whole shaila is whether or not there's an exemption of tamun, and it's not a question of min b'minoi. Yachi my area al gabe chavera. I feel ba'afer u'v'tzor nami. Why is the Bryce discussing a case where what's covering up the stock is another stock? It could have picked a case where it was min b'sheini minoi. One stock of wheat was covered over with earth or rocks. If the whole shaila is about tamun, if tamun is b'chlal a problem, so tomorrow ain't chanami. It could have done that because it would have the same halacha. If you hold there's a problem of tamun, doesn't matter what it's covered with. The reason why I picked the case of min b'minai is to show the koyach hachomer of Rabbi Yehuda, the amar afilu min b'minai have a tamun. It's considered tamun even if it's min b'minai, even if one wheat is covering other wheat, the lower wheat is called tamun, and there won't be a din shikha. Actually, it's a chiddush lakula that there's no din shikha. Tanarabban. Now let's go back to the miutim, the qualifications for a egla roof. Tanarabban, halal, v'loy chanuk. The death have to come, Rashi says, through a sharp metal object, like a knife or a spear or a sword that pierces the skin. But if someone was choked to death, there would not be the halacha of egla roof. Halal, v'loy mefarfer. The person has to be dead when you find him. He can't still be gasping for breath. Badama, he has to be found on the ground. V'loy tamun, not covered over, like we learned in the Mishnah. V'loy tamun bagal, not covered over with debris. Noifel, v'loy tali be'ilan, he can't be hanging. V'sada v'loy tzav pnei hamayim. This is just like our Mishnah says. But Rabbi Lazar, who our Mishnah does not quote, argues. And he said, B'chulon im halal arfin. There's only one word to be medaik, and that's halal. It has to be killed with a knife, the spear, with a sharp metal object. That's the only thing you need. If he was killed that way, it doesn't matter if you found him on an elon, it doesn't matter if you found him on Pnei Hamayim, it doesn't matter if you find him under a pile of stones. If he's a halal, there's a din of orphan. Tanya, we learned. Amar Rabbi Yosy bar Yehuda, Amar Rabbi Lazar. I told Rabbi Lazar, I don't understand. You cannot tell me that we're not medaik from the words of the pasuk, because you yourself are medaik that halal means dafka if he was killed with a sharp knife and not choked to death. If he was choked and sitting on the ground, alma halal. So that means you are being medaik from the words of the pasuk, and you're saying halal is excluding chanuk. So why aren't you medaik from all the other words of the pasuk? Hakanami badama v'latam bagal. Noifel v'latal be'ilan, v'sada v'latal al gabe mayim. Having the Gemara, Rabbi Lazar told you you're not medaik from all these things. So why was he medaik that halal dafka and not chanuk? Because Rabbi Lazar halal yiserikse. It says halal many times in the parsha. So Rabbi Lazar medaik from the fact that the Torah repeats halal multiple times. That's where there's a hakbad. All the other conditions of the chachamim, Rabbi Lezer holds there's no such a quote. If the mace was found near the border or near a Goyish city like Chicago, where the murder rate is off the charts, there's no din egla rufa there. Why not? If in some odd occasion it occurs, if murder is common in that area, there is no din egla rufa. It's only if a murder is highly unusual for that area. What's up is if it's a city without a bezin, you don't measure from it. The be'ina zikneir v'laka, because you need zikneir, you need bezin, and you don't have that. Ein moedin el ear, you only measure to an ear with bezin. Fake more pshita. A second ago we just said that ein moedin. A second ago we said oil ear shein bezin, you don't measure from there. So why does the Mishnah repeat a second later? Ein moedin el ear sheyesh bezin pshita. Even the tunnel ear shein bezin. And now Yadana, I already know they moedin el ear sheyesh bezin. So why is the Mishnah repeating that ein moedin el eir sheyesh bezin? Hakamash malon kiditanya. Minayin shem nimtza samach leir shein bezin. Shemanich noisa umoedin leir sheyesh bezin. How do you know that if the mess was found near a city that has no bezin, you measure to the closest city that has a bezin? Whichever city that has a bezin, that's the closest city with a bezin, that is the city that does this process. Beautiful. Now we can start the next mission. What happens if it was nimtza mechuvin ben shtei yoretz? What if the mace was precisely in the center between two cities? The halacha is shtein meviyai shtei agolos. There's no suffix here. It's a vadai. It's a vadai in the center, and therefore there's a vadai halacha that two cities bring an egla rufa. Divi Rabbi Eliezer, these are the words of Rabbi Eliezer. That's halacha number one. Halacha number two, ben Yerushalayim mevi egla rufa. Yerushalayim doesn't bring egla rufa. I pointed it out because it's not l'rishta. Egla rufa only applies to cities that were distributed to Klal Yisrael, unlike Yerushalayim, which remains public property. What happens if nimtza roishay b'makam echad? Rachman l'tzon, his head was severed. So the head of the mace was in one place, the gufay b'makam acher, and the body was elsewhere. Halach is ma'lichin haroish eitzal haguf. You bring the head to the guf. Divi Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Kiva Omer haguf eitzal haroish. You bring the body to the head. Now the Gemara, now the Mishnah asks me, they measured from the body to the city. Where on the body did they measure from? Rabbi Eliezer mitibure, they measure from his belly button, center of his body. Rabbi Kiva Omer from his nose, which is where he breathes from. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov Omer mimokim shenasa chalal mitzavara. We're talking about a halal. Where does someone become a halal? In his neck, where he's slashed. Zok the Gemara, my time with Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer who holds that both cities who are equally distant from the egla, from the murder victim, they both bring an egla rufa. First of all, he has to hold that it's possible to be precise and know that it's exactly equally distant from each city. Because if it wasn't precise, then it's a suffix. If it's a suffix, then each of these cities should chip in and buy one egla rufa and bring it with a t'nai. If we're closer, it's our egla rufa. And if you're closer, it's your egla rufa. But Rabbi Eliezer doesn't say that. He said they both bring. So it must be it's possible to verify that the Metzias is that it's exactly equidistant from both cities. Ukraiva filu kraivas. And he also dashes the pasuk says the city that's kraiva elameis brings egla rufa. So he learns kraiva doesn't mean that it has to be only one city. It could even be multiple cities that are equally kraiva. Both will bring, and that's where Rabbi Elazar's halacha comes from. Only cities that are given and distributed to individual shvatim. The Kasavar and Artana hold Yerushalayim lo nischach l'shvatim. Yerushalayim remained a city that belonged to the whole Klal Yisrael. Nimta roishay b'makam. You know, the last time I stayed in Israel, so I didn't want to pay rent for my apartment. I told him Yerushalayim lo nischach l'shvatim. Didn't go over that well. Zok the Helig Gemara Vaiter. Nimta roishay b'makam. What is this discussion about? If the head goes to the body goes to the head. If they're arguing as to where you measure from the body, from the head, it can't be. Because the Mishnah is not discussing where you measure from till the next step. So that can't be the discussion over here. Mechlal the Reisha loy b'medi daskina. Amri Yitzchak, you know what we're talking about? The Meis Mitzvah Kodim Mekayim Mekayim. The halacha is if someone dies, a Meis Mitzvah, in your property, you've just lost like 8 square feet because you have to provide land to bury this mace. So what if the body was in Reuven's property and the head rolled over and it was in Shimon's property? Which one of these two people, Reuven or Shimon, has to donate his property to allow the burial of this Meis Mitzvah? A Meis Mitzvah is kind of the place where he dies, and he's entitled to be buried there. And this was a Tanai that Yeshua put into the land when he distributed the land to Klal Yisrael. He told them, I just want you to know, part of your deed says that if a Meis Mitzvah dies on your property, he gets buried there. So what happens is, where do you bury the body? Where do we say he died? We say the place of death is where the body is, and the head rolled. We say that the person died where the head is found. As soon as his head was chopped off, the body dropped to the floor, and the head rolled. So the place of death is where the body is. The head was chopped off and fell right down. Even though this person's head was cut off, he could still take a couple of steps. His nerves still might take a couple of steps. So the place of death is actually where his head is. Where on the body did they measure from? One holds that the main life of a person is from his nose, where he breathes. The main source of life is in his belly. Let's suggest that this machlokes tanoim of where life is from is totally in a different machlokes tanoim about where a person starts to be created from. Which cells start first? His head starts to form first. From the womb of my mother, ata goizi, and goizi refers to the head, because it says gazi nezir chavashlichi, cut off your hair and throw it out, so it's referring to the head. Abashol aimer bitibure, a person is created from his belly, umishalach shirasha elapayla, and it starts in his belly and it expands in all directions. Zok the Gemara, the machlokes of where a person is created from is not necessarily the same machlokes as to what provides a person with life. Even if you don't like Abashol, the person is created from his belly, he's just saying that when the body starts to form, it starts from the belly and grows out. But the part of his body that keeps him most alive, even Abishol would agree that the place where he lives from is where he breathes, from his nose. You see, Ruach Chaim is associated with Apo. Therefore, the machlokes of Abishol and the Tanakama is completely independent of our shaila over here as to where's the makam achias of a person. So you see, when you talk about a halal, it's associated with the word tzavar. So at the end of the day, we have 3 shittas of where you measure from. You either measure from the nose, or you measure from the belly button, or you measure from the place of the wound from his neck. We also had another machlokes when we say Meis Mitzvah Kodim Mekayim, if the head and the body are separated, do we say the place of death was where the body is and the head rolled, or do we say the place of death is where the head fell and the body moved along? Okay, Baruch Hashem, we were zeicha to finish today's daf, and tomorrow, Baruch Hashem, at 7 a.m. sharp, and at 9 a.m. we will start from the Mishnah on Mem Hey Amud Beis.
Shkoyach, Yosy, I get the work.
Shkoyach.
Good luck.
Yosy?
Yeah.
Yosy, I want to call you. Can I call you now?
Yes.